Billionaire demanded the divorce be final, until he discovered his ex had just given birth to twins. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The mahogany conference table reflected the dim light of Seattle's overcast morning as Carter Langston adjusted his platinum cufflinks for the third time. At 37, he commanded every room he entered with the kind of presence that came from building a tech engineering empire worth billions. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his 6'2" frame filling out his tailored navy suit with an elegance that spoke of old money and new power. Steel gray eyes that had closed deals worth hundreds of millions now stared blankly at the divorce papers spread before him. 8 months. 8 months since Lauren had walked out of their Bellevue mansion without a single raised voice, without drama, without the explosive confrontation he'd somehow expected. She'd simply packed her vintage leather suitcase, folded her clothes with that meticulous care he'd grown accustomed to, and disappeared into the rain-soaked streets of the Pacific Northwest. Mr. Langston? His lead attorney, Harrison Wells, cleared his throat. The papers have been ready for months. We just need Mrs. Langston's signature to finalize everything. Carter's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Langston. Even now the title felt both foreign and familiar on his tongue. Lauren Fields Langston, 30 years old, with honey blonde hair that caught sunlight like spun gold and green eyes that held depths he'd never quite learned to navigate. She came from the prestigious Fields family, renowned in legal circles throughout Washington state, but unlike her sharp-tongued siblings, Lauren possessed a quietness that had both attracted and mystified him. Their marriage had been an alliance, two powerful families joining forces. But somewhere between the perfectly orchestrated wedding and their sterile daily routines, Carter had realized something that terrified him. Lauren deserved better than a husband who treated love like a business transaction. She's not responding to any of our communications, Harrison continued, shuffling through documents. Her family claims they haven't heard from her either. It's unusual. Carter's fingers drummed against the table. Unusual. That was one word for it. What was unusual was how empty their sprawling 4,000-square-foot home felt, without the sound of Lauren's bare feet on the hardwood floors, without her quietly humming while she arranged fresh peonies in crystal vases, without the sight of her curled up in the window seat overlooking Lake Washington, reading legal briefs with the same intensity she brought to everything else. He'd married Lauren because it made sense. She was intelligent, refined, came from the right family. But he'd fallen for the way she remembered exactly how he liked his coffee, the way she'd leave little notes in his briefcase. Never romantic declarations, just simple reminders about dinner reservations or dry cleaning. The way she'd sit beside him during his late-night work sessions, not speaking, just present. Send another notice, Carter said finally, his voice carrying the authority that had built his empire. Make it clear this needs to be resolved immediately. I have investors asking questions about my personal affairs, and I won't have business decisions delayed by... He stopped. By what? By the woman who'd made their house feel like home. By the only person who'd ever seen him struggle with insomnia and simply brought him warm milk without making it into a conversation about his stress levels. By pending legal matters, he finished coldly. Harrison nodded and gathered the papers. I'll handle it today, sir. As the attorney left, Carter turned toward the floor-to-ceiling windows of his downtown Seattle office. Somewhere out there, Lauren was living her life, probably relieved to be free of a husband who'd given her financial security, but never the one thing she'd deserved from the beginning. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant about the afternoon's board meeting, but Carter's mind wandered to a memory. Lauren in their kitchen last Christmas morning, wearing his oversized MIT sweatshirt, her hair messy from sleep, quietly making pancakes while snow fell outside. She'd looked up and caught him watching her, and for just a moment, her smile had been radiant. He'd been too afraid to tell her what that smile did to him. Now, it was too late. What happens when a man who's built his life on control discovers that the most important thing was always beyond his grasp? Lauren pressed her palm against the cool brick wall of the small Capitol Hill apartment building, waiting for another wave of nausea to pass. The morning sickness had been relentless for weeks, but today felt different, heavier somehow, as if her body was trying to tell her something she wasn't ready to hear. Her phone buzzed with another message from her mother. Darling, the Hastings are asking about you and Carter at the charity luncheon. What should I tell them? Lauren deleted the message without responding. just as she had with the 17 others from various family members over the past month. Let them wonder. Let them create their own explanations for why Carter Langston's wife had vanished from Seattle's social circuit without a trace. The truth was simpler and more complicated than anyone could imagine. She loved him, had loved him from the moment she'd first seen him at her law school graduation, standing tall and impossibly handsome in his charcoal suit, deep in conversation with her father about some acquisition deal. Even then, his gray eyes had held an intensity that made her pulse quicken. When their families had suggested the marriage 2 years later, Lauren had said yes not because it was expected, but because it meant she could wake up beside the man she'd been quietly dreaming about. The irony was devastating. She'd spent 3 years married to Carter Langston, sharing his bed, his home, his name, and he'd never known that every careful gesture, every quiet moment of care, had been born from a love so deep it took her breath away. Her small one-bedroom apartment was a far cry from their Bellevue mansion, but Lauren had furnished it with pieces that felt like her: a vintage writing desk from a Pike Place antique shop, soft throw pillows in sage green, books stacked everywhere because she'd finally allowed herself to read for pleasure again. The space smelled like the lavender candles she'd never dared to burn in Carter's pristine home. Dr. Evelyn Martinez's office waiting room was nearly empty at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning. Lauren had chosen this practice specifically because it was far from the exclusive medical center where the Langston and Fields families received their care. Here, she could be just Lauren, not the wife of a billionaire, not the daughter of prominent attorneys. Lauren Fields? The nurse's voice was kind, professional. Lauren had kept her maiden name for the appointment, a small rebellion that felt enormous. The ultrasound gel was cold against her still flat stomach. Dr. Martinez moved the wand slowly, her dark eyes focused on the screen that Lauren couldn't see from her angle. The silence stretched longer than seemed normal. "Is everything all right?" Lauren's voice came out smaller than she intended. Dr. Martinez smiled, the kind of smile that held secrets. "Everything is more than all right. Lauren, you're carrying twins." The world tilted. Lauren's hands flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes instantly. "Twins? 2 healthy heartbeats. Based on the measurements, I'd say you're about 12 weeks along." Dr. Martinez turned the screen so Lauren could see. "Would you like to know if they're identical or fraternal?" Lauren stared at the grainy images, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. 2 tiny forms, impossibly small and perfect. Carter's children. Their children. "Fraternal," Dr. Martinez continued. "A boy and a girl." The tears came in earnest then. Lauren pressed her face into her hands, overwhelmed by a flood of emotions she couldn't name. Joy, terror, love, loneliness. They crashed over her in waves. "Do you have support at home?" Dr. Martinez asked gently, handing her tissues. "The father?" Lauren shook her head. "It's complicated. He doesn't know, and I don't think I can tell him." Dr. Martinez sat down, her expression compassionate. "Pregnancy is never just about the mother, Lauren. These babies will need their father, and he deserves to know they exist." "You don't understand," Lauren whispered. "He asked me for a divorce. He wants to be free of me. How can I trap him with children he never wanted?" "Are you sure he never wanted children? Or are you sure he never wanted children with you?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Lauren thought about Carter's face when they'd passed families in the park, the way his expression softened when he watched children play. She thought about the way he'd once mentioned converting one of their spare bedrooms into a nursery before catching himself and changing the subject. As Lauren walked back to her car, clutching the ultrasound photos, her phone rang. Harrison Wells, Carter's attorney. She let it go to voicemail, but his words would haunt her for the rest of the day. "Mrs. Langston? Mr. Langston is becoming increasingly impatient with this delay. He's demanded that we expedite the divorce proceedings immediately. Please contact our office by the end of the week, or we'll be forced to pursue alternative legal measures." Lauren sat in her Honda Civic. She'd sold the Mercedes Carter had bought her, and stared at the tiny black and white images in her hands. 2 babies who would grow up with their father's eyes and her stubborn streak. 2 babies who might never know how much their parents had loved each other in all the ways that mattered, except the ones that counted most. Carter stood in the doorway of what used to be Lauren's study, his hand frozen on the crystal doorknob. 6 months had passed since she'd left, yet he still found himself gravitating toward this room like a moth to flame. Her absence felt most acute here, surrounded by the carefully curated collection of legal texts and first-edition novels she'd treasured. The afternoon Seattle rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting shifting shadows across the Persian rug Lauren had chosen during their second year of marriage. She'd spent 3 weekends visiting estate sales and antique shops, finally finding this particular piece in a small store in Fremont. Carter remembered how her face had lit up when she'd discovered it. Not the polite smile she wore at charity galas, but genuine delight that made her green eyes sparkle. He'd bought it for her without question, even though it clashed with the modern aesthetic of their home. Now the rug seemed to mock him, a tangible reminder of how little he'd understood about making his wife happy. He'd given her everything money could buy but had withheld the one thing she'd probably wanted most, his heart, unguarded and honest. "Sir?" Margaret, their longtime housekeeper, appeared in the doorway. At 65, she'd worked for the Langston family since Carter was in college, and her British accent still carried notes of gentle reproach when she disapproved of something. "Your dinner is getting cold." Carter didn't turn around. "I'm not particularly hungry, Margaret." "You haven't been particularly hungry for quite some time now." She stepped into the room, her sensible shoes silent on the hardwood. "If you don't mind me saying, sir, this isn't what Mrs. Lauren would want for you." The use of present tense wasn't lost on him. Margaret had never accepted that Lauren was gone for good, referring to her absence as if she'd simply gone on an extended vacation. "Mrs. Lauren isn't here to want anything from me anymore, Margaret." "Isn't she?" Margaret moved closer, her weathered hands clasped in front of her pristine apron. "Because it seems to me that everything you're doing these days is because of what you think she'd want. The divorce papers you keep staring at but never sign. The way you've been working 18-hour days to avoid coming home to this empty house. The way you still have her morning coffee cup set out on the breakfast table." Carter's jaw tightened. He hadn't realized anyone had noticed that particular habit. "I'm simply trying to finalize our legal arrangements efficiently. Mr. Carter." Margaret's voice softened with the familiarity of someone who'd bandaged his scraped knees as a child and later celebrated his business victories. "In all my years working for your family, I've never seen you fight so hard against something you actually wanted." Carter turned away from the window, running his hand through his dark hair. The truth was, he'd been staring at those divorce papers for weeks without signing them. Every time he picked up his pen, something inside him rebelled, some stubborn part of his heart that refused to accept that Lauren was truly gone. His phone buzzed with a text from Harrison Wells. Still no response from Lauren. "Should we pursue alternative legal measures?" Carter deleted the message without responding. He'd been threatening alternative legal measures for months, but the truth was he had no idea what those measures would even look like. How do you force someone to divorce you when part of you is terrified they actually will? "Perhaps," Margaret said carefully, "the problem isn't that Mrs. Lauren won't sign the papers. Perhaps the problem is that you don't really want her to." Carter's phone rang before he could respond. The caller ID showed his office line, unusual for this time of evening. He answered with his standard business tone. "Langston." "Mr. Langston?" His executive assistant Vivian's voice was breathless. "Urgent. I'm sorry to call so late, but I just received a call from Virginia Mason Medical Center. They're asking for you specifically. Something about Lauren being admitted." Carter's blood ran cold. "Admitted? What's wrong? Was there an accident?" "No, sir, not an accident, sir. They said she's in labor. She's having the baby now." The phone slipped from Carter's suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering onto Lauren's antique writing desk. Margaret's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room besides the rain, which seemed to have intensified into a torrential downpour. Baby. Lauren was having a baby. His baby. The realization hit him like a physical blow. For 8 months, while he'd been consumed with divorce papers and wounded pride, Lauren had been carrying his child. Alone. She'd been dealing with morning sickness, doctor appointments, preparing for motherhood, and he'd known nothing. "Sir?" Vivian's voice drifted up from the phone's speaker. "Mr. Langston, are you there? Should I arrange for a car?" Carter sank into Lauren's chair, his hands shaking as he picked up the phone. His voice came out as barely a whisper. "Did they say, how is she?" "They wouldn't give me details over the phone. But sir, they mentioned twins. She's having twins." The world stopped rotating on its axis. Twins. Lauren was giving birth to twins. Their twins. Right now, at this very moment. And she'd planned to do it without him ever knowing they existed. The woman who used to trace patterns on his chest when she thought he was sleeping. The woman who'd learned every small thing that brought him comfort and had quietly provided them all. She was having his children, and she'd chosen to do it completely alone. Carter was already reaching for his keys before he'd fully processed the decision to go to her. The rain-slicked streets of Seattle blurred past as Carter's Aston Martin roared through the night. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white, his mind reeling with questions that had no answers. How long had Lauren known? When had she planned to tell him, if ever? Had she been afraid? Had she needed him during those long months of carrying their children? Their children. The phrase felt foreign and miraculous at the same time. Virginia Mason Medical Center's emergency entrance glowed like a beacon through the storm. Carter abandoned his car in the first available space, not caring that it was clearly marked for ambulances only. His Italian leather shoes slipped on the wet pavement as he ran toward the sliding glass doors, his heart hammering against his ribs. The reception desk was staffed by a tired-looking woman in her 50s who barely glanced up when he approached. "I need to find Lauren Langston," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "She's in labor. Twins." The receptionist's fingers moved slowly across her keyboard. "And you are?" "Her husband." The words came out with an authority he didn't feel. After 8 months of separation and pending divorce papers, did he still have the right to claim that title? "Room 314, maternity ward. 3rd floor, elevator bank is..." Carter was already moving before she finished speaking. The elevator seemed to take an eternity, each floor chiming softly as if mocking his urgency. When the doors finally opened on the 3rd floor, he was greeted by the organized chaos of a busy maternity ward. Nurses moving purposefully between rooms, the distant sound of newborn cries, the antiseptic smell that somehow managed to be both clinical and hopeful. He found room 314 and stopped outside the door, his hand frozen on the handle. Through the small window he could see movement, medical staff in blue scrubs, the rhythmic beeping of monitors. But he couldn't see Lauren, and that terrified him more than anything else. "Excuse me." A tall woman in navy scrubs approached him. "Are you the father?" Carter nodded, not trusting his voice. "I'm Dr. Rebecca Thompson, the attending physician. Your wife is doing beautifully, but I need to ask, and where have you been?" This is her first pregnancy, and she's been handling everything alone. No birth partner, no support person listed in her file. The weight of her words hit him like a physical blow. Lauren had been facing the biggest moment of her life completely alone because she'd believed, correctly, that he wouldn't want to be there. There were complications, personal complications. "How is she?" "Strong. Stronger than most women I see, honestly. But labor with twins can be unpredictable. She's been in active labor for 6 hours now. Baby A is in position, but baby B is being stubborn. Doctor." Thompson studied his face with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every kind of family drama play out in hospital corridors. "Do you want to see her?" Carter's throat felt tight. Would she want to see me?" "I think," Dr. Thompson said gently, "that's a question only she can answer. But I will say this. No woman should have to bring 2 babies into this world alone if she doesn't have to." The doctor led him down the hall to a different room, a private suite that overlooked Elliott Bay. Through the doorway, Carter caught his first glimpse of Lauren in 8 months, and the sight nearly brought him to his knees. She was sitting up in the hospital bed, her honey blonde hair dark with perspiration and pulled back in a messy bun. Her face was flushed from exertion, but she'd never looked more beautiful to him. Her hands were pressed against her swollen belly, impossibly round with the children she'd been carrying while he'd been drowning in his own stupidity. She looked up when she heard footsteps, and her green eyes went wide with shock when she saw him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the steady beeping of the fetal monitors and the rain still pounding against the windows. "Carter." Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from hours of labor. "What are you doing here?" He stepped into the room slowly as if approaching a wounded animal that might bolt. "Vivian called. She said you were having the baby." "Babies." His eyes dropped to her belly, seeing the clear evidence of what she'd been hiding. "Lauren, why didn't you tell me?" Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but her voice was steady. "Because you asked me for a divorce. Because you wanted to be free of me. I couldn't trap you with children you never wanted." "Never wanted." Carter moved closer to the bed, his own eyes burning. "Lauren, I have wanted children with you since the day we got married. I thought you were the one who didn't want them. I thought you were trapped in our marriage, that you'd be happier without..." A contraction hit her mid-sentence, and Lauren's face contorted with pain. Her hands gripped the bed rails so tightly Carter could see her tendons straining beneath her skin. Without thinking, he reached for her, covering her hands with his own. "Breathe," he whispered, remembering suddenly all the birth preparation classes he'd secretly researched. but never had the courage to suggest they take together. Just breathe through it. Lauren's eyes found his during the contraction, and for 30 seconds, the 8 months of silence and misunderstanding fell away. They were just a man and woman bringing their children into the world together. When the contraction passed, Lauren sagged back against the pillows, but she didn't pull her hands away from his. "They're coming tonight," she said softly, "ready or not." The next contraction came faster and harder than the previous one. Lauren's grip on Carter's hands tightened until he was certain she might break his fingers, but he didn't pull away. 8 months of believing she didn't want him there, and now he couldn't imagine being anywhere else. "That's it, Lauren," Dr. Thompson said, positioning herself at the foot of the bed. "Baby A is crowning. On the next contraction, I need you to push with everything you have." Carter watched Lauren's face transform with determination. Even in the midst of the most physically demanding experience of her life, she possessed a grace that took his breath away. Her green eyes were focused and fierce, her jaw set with the same stubborn resolve he'd seen her use to master difficult legal cases. "I can see the head, Dr. Thompson announced. "One more push, Lauren." The room filled with the controlled urgency of medical professionals doing what they did best. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency, preparing warming lamps and monitoring equipment. But Carter's entire world had narrowed to the woman in the bed beside him, her hand in his, their children about to enter the world. Lauren bore down with a strength that seemed impossible for someone who barely reached his shoulder when she stood. A cry escaped her lips. Not quite pain, not quite triumph, but something primal and powerful that spoke to the very essence of creating life. And then, suddenly, there was another sound in the room, a tiny, indignant wail that made Carter's heart stop and restart in the same instant. Dr. Thompson lifted a small, slippery form, red-faced and furious at being evicted from the only home it had ever known. "It's a girl," Dr. Thompson announced with a smile. "And she has quite the set of lungs on her." Carter stared at the tiny person being cleaned and examined by the nurses. His daughter. He had a daughter. She was impossibly small, with dark hair that looked like it might curl when dry and tiny fists that punched at the air as if demanding answers about this bright, cold new world. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Lauren, she's absolutely perfect." But Lauren barely had time to catch her breath before the next wave of contractions began. Baby B, it seemed, had decided that if his sister could make this dramatic entrance, he wasn't going to be outdone. "Here we go again," Dr. Thompson said. "This one's in a bit more of a hurry." The second birth was faster, more intense. Lauren's exhaustion was evident, but she pushed through with the same fierce determination. Carter found himself whispering encouragement, words he didn't even know he had in him. "You're incredible," he murmured against her temple. "You're the strongest person I've ever known." 5 minutes later, their son announced his arrival with a cry that was somehow both smaller and more insistent than his sister's. Where she had been furious, he seemed confused, as if he couldn't quite understand why his warm, safe world had suddenly become so bright and vast. "And here's your boy," Dr. Thompson said, holding up a baby who was unmistakably smaller than his twin but no less perfect. Fraternal twins, a boy and a girl. Carter looked between his children, their children, and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. The man who had built an empire through careful planning and calculated risks had just witnessed the most beautiful chaos imaginable. These tiny humans had existed for months without his knowledge, growing and developing while he'd been focused on divorce papers and wounded pride. "What are their names?" Dr. Thompson asked as the nurses completed their initial assessments. "For the birth certificates." Carter looked at Lauren, realizing suddenly that she'd been making these decisions alone for months. She'd probably chosen names, decorated a nursery, prepared for their arrival without any input from him. The weight of everything she'd carried by herself was staggering. Lauren's eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but they held a clarity that cut straight to his heart. "Liam," she said softly, looking at their son. "Liam James, after your grandfather." She turned to their daughter. "And Isla." Isla rose. Carter felt tears he hadn't cried since his parents' funeral burning behind his eyes. She'd named their son after his grandfather, the man who'd taught him everything he knew about business and integrity. Even in their separation, even when she'd believed he didn't want these children, she'd honored his family. "They're beautiful names," he managed to say. "Perfect names." As the nurses cleaned and weighed the babies, Carter found himself studying Lauren's profile. Her face was soft with exhaustion and wonder, her eyes following every movement the medical team made with their children. She looked like a mother, not just any mother, but the mother of his children, the woman who'd given him the greatest gift he'd never known he wanted. "Lauren," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion he'd kept buried for too long. "I need you to know something. I never wanted the divorce because I didn't love you. I wanted it because I thought you deserved better than a husband who didn't know how to show you how much you meant to him." She turned to look at him, her green eyes searching his face for something he hoped she would find. "Carter, I was an idiot," he continued before she could speak. "The biggest idiot who ever lived. Because you were never trapped in our marriage, Lauren. I was the one who was trapped by my own fear of not being enough for you. And now," he gestured helplessly toward where the nurses were bundling Liam and Isla in soft blankets. "Now I've missed months of this. Months of taking care of you, of talking to them, of being the partner you needed while you were creating our family." The room had grown quiet except for the soft sounds of newborn fussing and the gentle beeping of monitors. Lauren reached up with her free hand and touched his cheek, her thumb brushing away a tear he hadn't realized had fallen. "They're here now," she whispered. "We're all here now." The neonatal intensive care unit was quieter than Carter had expected. Soft lighting cast a warm glow over the rows of isolates and monitors, creating an atmosphere that was both high-tech and surprisingly peaceful. He stood frozen in the doorway, overwhelmed by the sight of his children, his actual children, lying side by side in their clear plastic bassinets. Liam was sleeping peacefully, his tiny chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of new life. At barely 5 pounds, he seemed impossibly fragile, his dark hair forming soft wisps against his pink scalp. Isla, slightly larger at 5 pounds 8 ounces, had her eyes open and was staring with the intense focus that newborns sometimes possessed, as if she was trying to decode the mysteries of this strange new world. First time seeing them without all the chaos? Carter turned to find Dr. Thompson approaching with 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one and he accepted it gratefully, realizing he hadn't eaten or drunk anything since before Vivian's call hours ago. "They're so small," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are they going to be okay?" "They're perfect for 36-week twins," Dr. Thompson assured him. "Strong heartbeats, good reflexes, breathing well on their own. Lauren did an excellent job taking care of herself during the pregnancy. They just need a few days of monitoring before they can go home." Home. Carter realized with a jolt that he had no idea where Lauren was planning to take their children. The small Capitol Hill apartment Vivian had mentioned? Was there even room for 2 babies there? Had she prepared a nursery? Bought cribs? The thought of her handling all those preparations alone while he'd been harassing her with divorce papers made his stomach turn. "Can I?" He started, then stopped, feeling suddenly uncertain. "Can I touch them?" Dr. Thompson smiled. "Of course. You're their father. Just wash your hands first and be gentle. They're stronger than they look, but they're still getting used to being outside the womb." Carter scrubbed his hands with the thoroughness of a surgeon, his movements careful and deliberate. When he approached Isla's bassinet, she turned her head slightly toward him, and their eyes met for the first time. Her eyes were dark blue, too early to know if they'd stay that way or change to green like Lauren's, but they seemed to look right through him, with an awareness that took his breath away. "Hello, sweetheart," he whispered, extending one finger to stroke her impossibly soft cheek. "I'm your daddy. I know I wasn't here before, but I'm here now." Isla's tiny hand moved, fingers spreading open before closing around his index finger with a grip that was surprisingly strong. Carter felt something fundamental shift in his chest. Not just love, but a fierce protectiveness that was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. This tiny person, barely hours old, had just claimed a piece of his heart he hadn't known existed. "She knows you," Dr. Thompson observed quietly. "Babies recognize their parents' voices. She heard you talking to Lauren during labor." Carter moved to Liam's bassinet, his son's peaceful, sleeping face stirring the same overwhelming rush of emotion. When he gently touched Liam's hand, the baby's fingers curled reflexively around his thumb, and Carter felt tears he couldn't contain anymore. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner," he whispered to both of them. "I'm so sorry your mama had to do this alone. But I promise both of you that I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for lost time." "Carter?" He turned to find Lauren in the doorway, moving slowly with the careful gait of someone still recovering from delivery. She'd changed into a soft pink hospital gown, and her hair was clean and pulled back in a loose braid. Even exhausted and pale, she was the most beautiful sight he'd ever seen. "You should be resting," he said, moving toward her instinctively. "I couldn't sleep." I wanted to check on them. She paused beside him, close enough that he could smell the faint lavender scent of her soap. How are they doing? Perfect. They're absolutely perfect, Lauren. He looked down at her, studying the face he'd memorized during 3 years of marriage, but somehow felt like he was seeing clearly for the first time. Just like their mother. A flush crept across her cheeks. Carter, we need to talk. About what happens now. About the divorce papers, about where I'm living, about... The divorce papers don't matter, he said firmly. None of that matters anymore. But I wanted you to be happy, he interrupted. I thought you were miserable with me, and I thought setting you free was the right thing to do. I was wrong about everything, Lauren. About what you wanted, about what I was capable of giving you, about what we could be together. Lauren's eyes filled with fresh tears. I was never miserable with you, Carter. I was miserable because I thought you didn't want me there. I thought I was just convenient. The right wife from the right family who kept your house running smoothly. You kept my life running smoothly, he said, reaching out to cup her face in his hands. You made everything better just by existing in it. The way you hummed while you cooked breakfast. The way you left little notes in my briefcase. The way you'd curl up next to me when I was working late, not asking for attention, just being there. You noticed those things? I noticed everything about you. I just didn't know how to tell you that they were the best parts of my day. Isla chose that moment to let out a small cry, breaking the spell between them. Lauren moved toward the bassinet, and Carter watched as her entire demeanor transformed. She became softer, more radiant, speaking in gentle murmurs as she soothed their daughter. She's hungry, Lauren said, looking up at him. I should feed her. Can I help? The words came out before he could stop them. I mean, I know I can't actually feed her, but I could bring her to you? Or hold Liam while you nurse her? Lauren's smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. I'd like that. I'd like that very much. As Carter carefully lifted Liam from his bassinet, marveling at how light and warm his son felt in his arms, he realized that for the first time in 8 months he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. 3 days later, Carter found himself in a place he'd never imagined, hunched over a tiny changing table in the hospital nursery, fumbling with what seemed like an impossibly complex diaper, while Liam stared up at him with patient dark eyes. The tabs go in the front, Mr. Langston, Nurse Patricia said with barely concealed amusement. She was in her 50s, with graying hair, and the kind of maternal authority that made even billionaire CEOs feel like awkward teenagers. And you might want to cover him with that cloth unless you enjoy being surprised. As if on cue, Liam chose that moment to demonstrate exactly what she meant. Carter jumped back, narrowly avoiding the small fountain, while Nurse Patricia chuckled and handed him more wipes. Parenthood is full of surprises, she said kindly. The trick is learning to laugh at yourself. Carter cleaned up the mess and tried again, this time successfully securing the diaper without creating what looked like a medieval torture device. How do new parents ever figure this out? Practice. Lots and lots of practice. Nurse Patricia picked up Isla, who had been watching the proceedings with what Carter could have sworn was amusement. Your wife is a natural, though. She's been here every few hours, even when she should be resting. That was true. Despite the doctor's orders to take it easy, Lauren had barely left the hospital. She'd moved to a private room 2 doors down from the nursery, but Carter often found her sitting beside their children's bassinets at all hours, sometimes reading softly to them, sometimes just watching them sleep with an expression of wonder on her face. What struck him most was how she'd created this entire world without him. She knew which cry meant hunger versus discomfort. She could calm Isla with a specific gentle bounce that no one else had mastered. She'd somehow learned the rhythms of motherhood in 3 days, while he was still intimidated by a diaper change. Mr. Langston? Dr. Thompson appeared in the doorway. Could I speak with you privately? Carter's stomach clenched. Is something wrong? Are the babies? The babies are fine, she assured him quickly. This is about Lauren. There are some things in her medical history I think you should know. They walked to a small consultation room down the hall. Dr. Thompson closed the door and gestured for Carter to sit, her expression serious but not alarming. During Lauren's pregnancy, there were some complications. Nothing that put the babies at serious risk, but enough to require extra monitoring and care. She developed gestational diabetes around 20 weeks, which required dietary changes and blood sugar monitoring. She also had some early contractions around 32 weeks that landed her on modified bed rest for a month. Carter felt the blood drain from his face. She was on bed rest? For a month? Was she alone? As far as I know, yes. Her emergency contact was listed as her sister Melissa, but the nurses mentioned that Lauren seemed to handle most appointments and concerns by herself. Dr. Thompson paused, studying his face. Mr. Langston, I don't usually involve myself in my patients' personal lives, but Lauren is special. In 30 years of delivering babies, I've rarely seen a woman handle pregnancy complications with such grace and strength, but no one should have to do what she did alone. The weight of guilt crashed over Carter like a physical blow. While he'd been nursing his wounded pride and pushing for divorce papers, Lauren had been managing medical complications and preparing to raise twins by herself. She could have called him. She should have called him, but she hadn't because he'd made it clear he wanted out of their marriage. The gestational diabetes, he said quietly. Is she okay now? It typically resolves after delivery, but she'll need to be monitored. There's also an increased risk for type 2 diabetes later in life. Dr. Thompson leaned forward slightly. Mr. Langston, I'm telling you this because Lauren needs support right now. The postpartum period can be challenging under the best circumstances, but with twins and the stress she's been under, she'll have support, Carter said firmly. Whatever she needs, whatever the babies need. Dr. Thompson nodded. There's one more thing. During her intake interview, Lauren mentioned that she'd been experiencing some financial stress. She'd apparently liquidated some investments to cover medical expenses and prepare for the babies. I don't know the details, but Carter's jaw tightened. Lauren had sold investments, probably her grandmother's stocks that she'd treasured, to pay for their children's medical care while he'd been sitting in his mansion feeling sorry for himself. The woman who'd never asked him for anything during their marriage had quietly sacrificed her financial security, rather than involve him in their children's lives. Doctor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. In your professional opinion, why do you think Lauren kept this pregnancy from me? Dr. Thompson was quiet for a long moment. Fear, she said finally. Fear that you wouldn't want the babies. Fear that you'd feel trapped. Fear that she'd be complicating your life at a time when you'd made it clear you wanted her out of it. She paused. But, mostly, I think she was protecting herself. It's easier to handle rejection if you never give someone the chance to reject you. Carter left the consultation room feeling like he'd been hollowed out and rebuilt from scratch. He found Lauren in her room, sitting by the window with Isla in her arms. The afternoon sunlight caught the gold highlights in her hair, and she was humming softly, the same wordless melody he'd heard her sing while cooking breakfast during their marriage. How's Liam? She asked without looking up. Charming Nurse Patricia with his perfect diaper-changing cooperation, Carter said, trying to keep his tone light. Lauren, we need to talk. Something in his voice made her look up, her green eyes immediately wary. About what? About the gestational diabetes, about the bed rest, about you selling your grandmother's stocks to pay for medical bills. Her face went pale, confirming his suspicions. About all the things you went through alone while I was too proud and stupid to realize that loving you meant fighting for you, not walking away. Lauren's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. Carter, I couldn't tell you. You wanted the divorce. You wanted to be free. How could I trap you with sick pregnancies and medical complications, and you couldn't trap me with the best thing that's ever happened to me, he interrupted, moving to kneel beside her chair. Lauren, those babies aren't a trap. You aren't a trap. You're the reason I want to be a better man. Isla stirred in Lauren's arms, making small newborn sounds, and Carter reached out to stroke his daughter's tiny hand. When he looked back up at Lauren, she was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. What are you saying, Carter? I'm saying I love you. I'm saying I've loved you since the day we got married, but I was too afraid of not being enough for you to risk telling you. I'm saying that if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you and Liam and Isla are the most important things in my world. Lauren was quiet for so long that Carter began to fear he'd waited too long, pushed too hard, assumed too much. But then she shifted Isla to one arm and reached out to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with the same gentle care she'd always shown him. I never stopped loving you, she whispered. Even when I thought you didn't want me anymore. Even when I was scared and alone and convinced I was doing everything wrong. I never stopped. Carter stood in the doorway of Lauren's Capitol Hill apartment, holding 2 infant car seats and trying to process what he was seeing. The space was tiny, probably not much larger than their old walk-in closet, but Lauren had somehow transformed it into something that felt like home. Soft white curtains filtered the afternoon light, and every corner showed evidence of careful preparation for the babies. 2 cribs were positioned against the far wall, one draped with a mobile of tiny airplanes, the other with delicate butterflies. A changing station was set up on top of a dresser that Carter recognized from Lauren's childhood bedroom. Stacks of neatly folded baby clothes in soft blues, pinks, and yellows filled a small bookshelf, and nursing supplies were organized with the same meticulous care Lauren brought to everything. "This is where you were planning to bring them," he said quietly, and it wasn't really a question. Lauren shifted Isla in her arms, her expression defensive. "It's small, but it's clean and safe. The building has good security, and there's a park 2 blocks away for when they're older. I researched the school district and—" "Lauren." Carter set down the car seats and moved toward her, his heart breaking at the thought of her researching school districts alone, planning their children's futures without him. "It's beautiful. You made it beautiful, but you don't have to do this anymore." "Do what?" "Live like you're still alone." The words hung between them, loaded with 8 months of misunderstanding and hurt. Lauren sank into a rocking chair, another piece Carter recognized from her family home, and began nursing Isla with the practiced ease she'd developed over the past week in the hospital. "I don't know how to not be alone," she admitted quietly. "Even when we were married, I felt like I was living parallel to your life, not actually part of it." Carter knelt beside the rocking chair, careful not to disturb Isla's feeding. "That's my fault. All of it. I made you feel like a guest in your own marriage because I was too scared to let you see how much I needed you. You never needed me, Carter. You had everything figured out. Your business, your life, your perfect routines. I was just there. I needed you every day," he said firmly. "I needed the way you made our house feel like home instead of just a place I slept. I needed your quiet strength when board meetings went badly. I needed the way you'd sit with me during thunderstorms because you somehow knew they reminded me of the night my parents died." Lauren's head snapped up. "You never told me that. About the storms. I never told you a lot of things I should have. Like how I looked forward to coming home because it meant seeing you. Like how I kept working late because I was afraid if I spent too much time with you, you'd realize how completely gone I was and it would scare you away." Liam chose that moment to wake up with a demanding cry from his car seat. Carter stood and lifted his son, marveling again at how light and warm he felt. The baby settled immediately against his chest, and Carter felt that same overwhelming rush of protectiveness and love. "He likes you," Lauren observed with a small smile. "He's stuck with me now," Carter replied, gently bouncing Liam. "They both are. If you'll let me be stuck with them." Lauren was quiet for a long moment, her attention focused on Isla, but Carter could see the wheels turning in her mind. "What are you asking me, Carter?" "I'm asking you to come home, to bring our children home. I'm asking you to let me be the husband and father I should have been from the beginning. The divorce papers are going in the fireplace the minute we get back to Bellevue." Carter sat on the edge of the couch across from her, still holding Liam. "Lauren, I know I hurt you. I know I made you feel unwanted and unloved when you were the most important thing in my world. I know I have a lot to make up for, and I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm asking for one anyway. And if it doesn't work, if we try again and we're still just 2 people who don't know how to talk to each other, then we learn. We go to counseling. We figure out how to communicate. We do whatever it takes. But we do it together this time, not in parallel lives that never quite touch." Lauren looked around her small apartment, at the life she'd built for herself and their children without him. "I put so much work into making this place ready for them. You did, and it's perfect. But they deserve to grow up in their father's house too. They deserve to have both of us there when they take their first steps, say their first words, ask impossible questions about why the sky is blue. Margaret will want to spoil them rotten," Lauren said, and Carter caught the hint of a smile in her voice. "Margaret has been buying baby clothes for months without knowing why. She claims it was intuition, but I think she was just hoping." Carter shifted Liam to one arm and reached for Lauren's free hand. "Come home with me. Let me love you the way I should have been loving you all along." Lauren's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't pull her hand away. "I'm scared, Carter. I'm scared of hoping for something that might not be real." "It's real," he said firmly. "Look at me, Lauren. Really look at me. Does this feel like obligation to you? Does this feel like guilt or responsibility?" She studied his face for a long moment, her green eyes searching for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her because she squeezed his hand and nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, we can try." "We can more than try," Carter said, bringing her hand to his lips. "We can build something beautiful, the 4 of us." As if summoned by his words, Isla finished nursing and made a small, contented sound. Lauren lifted her to her shoulder for burping, and Carter watched his wife who was coming home, tend to their daughter with the natural grace that made everything she did look effortless. For the first time in 8 months, Carter Langston felt like the luckiest man alive. But as they prepared to pack up Lauren's carefully arranged apartment and return to Bellevue, neither of them noticed the black sedan that had been parked across the street for the past hour, or the man behind the wheel who'd been taking photographs of their reunion. 2 weeks later, Carter was discovering that newborn twins had a way of making time both drag and disappear simultaneously. It was 3 in the morning and he was walking the hardwood floors of their Bellevue home, gently bouncing Liam while Lauren nursed Isla in the rocking chair they'd moved to their bedroom. "I think he's finally settling," Carter whispered, feeling his son's tiny body relax against his chest. The past 2 weeks had been a crash course in parenthood that no business school had prepared him for, but somehow moments like this made all the sleepless nights worth it. "Thank goodness," Lauren murmured, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "I was starting to think he inherited your workaholic tendencies and planned to stay awake all night conducting board meetings." Carter smiled at that. In the past 2 weeks, Lauren had started making little jokes again, the kind of gentle teasing that had been part of their early marriage before everything had gotten so careful and distant between them. It felt like watching a flower bloom after a long winter. Margaret had been over the moon when they'd returned home with the babies. She'd converted the guest suite into a temporary nursery with efficiency that bordered on miraculous, and she'd taken to the babies like they were her own grandchildren. More than once, Carter had found her reading to them from classic literature in her crisp British accent, claiming that it's never too early to appreciate good storytelling. As Carter gently placed Liam in his crib, his phone buzzed with a text message. He frowned, checking the time. Who would be texting at 3 in the morning? The message was from an unknown number. "Congratulations on the twins. Beautiful family. It would be a shame if something happened to disturb this happiness." Carter's blood ran cold. Attached to the message was a photo, taken through their bedroom window, of him and Lauren with the babies just hours earlier. "Carter?" Lauren's voice was soft with concern. "What's wrong?" He quickly deleted the message and forced his expression to remain calm. "Nothing. Just a work emergency that can wait until morning." But as Lauren settled Isla back in her crib and they finally climbed into bed together, something that still felt miraculous after months of separation, Carter's mind was racing. Someone had been watching them. Someone had been close enough to their home to photograph them through their bedroom window, and that someone was now making veiled threats. The next morning, while Lauren was napping and Margaret was watching the babies, Carter called his head of security, James Morrison. They met in Carter's home office, a room that suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a war room. "I need you to look into something," Carter said, showing James the message and photo. "Someone's been watching the house." James studied the image with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent 20 years in private security. "This was taken with a telephoto lens, probably from the tree line behind your property. Professional quality. This isn't some random stalker, Mr. Langston. Then what is it? Someone with resources and a specific agenda. Any idea who might want to threaten your family?" Carter rubbed his face tiredly. "Business rivals, maybe? There's always someone unhappy about a deal or acquisition, but targeting my family. There's something else you should know," James said carefully. "I've been doing some background monitoring since the twins were born, and there's been some unusual activity. Someone's been asking questions about your wife, about the separation, the pregnancy, your financial arrangements." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggests someone was looking for leverage. Mr. Langston, I think someone has been planning this for a while." Before Carter could respond, his phone rang. Lauren's panicked voice filled the room when he answered. "Carter, you need to come upstairs right now. There's someone here." Carter took the stairs 3 at a time, James close behind him. He burst into the living room to find Lauren standing protectively in front of the baby's portable cribs, facing a woman he recognized but hadn't seen in over 2 years. Victoria Ashford, his former business partner and briefly much more than that. Victoria looked exactly as she always had, tall, elegant, with platinum blonde hair and the kind of calculating blue eyes that had once impressed him with their intelligence. Now they just looked cold. She was wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month, and she was holding an envelope. "Hello, Carter," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced. I wanted to congratulate you on your expanding family." "Victoria," Carter moved to stand beside Lauren, his arm automatically going around her waist. What are you doing here? Business, of course. It's always business with us, isn't it? Victoria's gaze flicked to Lauren with undisguised disdain before settling on the babies. Such beautiful children. It would be tragic if their father's past mistakes came to light and destroyed their future. What are you talking about? Lauren asked, her voice steady despite the fear Carter could feel radiating from her. Victoria opened the envelope and pulled out a series of photographs and documents. Oh, my dear Lauren, you really don't know, do you? You don't know about Carter's little indiscretion 3 years ago? Right around the time you were so lonely in your marriage, wondering why your husband seemed so distant. Carter felt the world tilt on its axis. Victoria, don't what? Don't tell your wife about our weekend in Vancouver? About how you came to me when your marriage felt cold and empty? About how you nearly threw away everything for one passionate mistake? Lauren went very still beside him. When Carter looked at her face, he saw something die in her eyes. The fragile trust they'd been rebuilding. The hope that they could make their marriage work. Lauren, he started, but she stepped away from him, her arms wrapping around herself protectively. Is it true? She whispered. Carter's silence was answer enough. Victoria smiled triumphantly. Now, about that business proposition I mentioned. You see, Carter, I have a rather significant problem. The SEC is investigating some of my recent acquisitions, and I need a clean company to merge with. Your company, specifically. And if you don't agree to my terms, she gestured to the photographs and documents still in her hands. These documents find their way to every major business publication in the country. Your wife learns all the details of our affair, your precious reputation, your marriage, your family. All of it becomes very public, very messy scandal. Carter looked between Victoria's cold smile and Lauren's devastated face, his heart breaking as he realized that just when he'd gotten his family back, he might lose them forever. You have 24 hours to decide, Victoria continued, heading toward the door. The merger agreement is in the envelope. I'll be expecting your signature by tomorrow evening. As the door closed behind her, Carter turned to face Lauren, but she was already walking away, her shoulders rigid with pain and betrayal. Lauren, please let me explain. Not now, she said without turning around. I need to think. Carter stood alone in his living room, listening to his children's soft breathing and watching his world crumble around him for the second time in less than a year. Carter found Lauren in what used to be her study, now converted into a nursery overflow room where they kept extra supplies and a rocking chair for quiet moments. She was sitting by the window overlooking Lake Washington, Isla sleeping peacefully in her arms. The morning light caught the tear tracks on her cheeks, and Carter felt his heart shatter all over again. Lauren, he said quietly from the doorway. Please, let me explain. She didn't look at him. How long? What? How long were you having an affair with her? Carter stepped into the room slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. It wasn't an affair. It was one weekend. One terrible, stupid weekend 3 years ago when I thought our marriage was over anyway. One weekend. Lauren's voice was flat, emotionless. That makes it better somehow? No, nothing makes it better. Nothing justifies what I did. Carter sat down across from her, his hands clasped tightly together. But I need you to understand the context. Context. She finally looked at him, and the pain in her green eyes was devastating. Please, explain the context that makes cheating on your wife acceptable. Carter took a shaky breath. You remember that period 3 years ago when we barely spoke to each other? When you started working late every night, when we'd go days without having a real conversation? I was working on the Henderson case, the biggest case of my career. I know, and I was proud of you. But I was also lost. I felt like I was living with a stranger. We'd become polite roommates, and I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to reach you. Lauren's grip on Isla tightened slightly. So you reached for Victoria instead. Victoria came to me with a business proposition, a merger that would have been huge for both our companies. We met in Vancouver to discuss terms, and Carter's voice broke. I was lonely, Lauren. I was so goddamn lonely in my own marriage, and she was there, and she made me feel wanted. For one weekend, I felt like someone actually wanted to be with me. I wanted to be with you, Lauren whispered. I was working so hard because I thought that was what you needed. A wife who was successful, who wouldn't be a burden on your career. I thought if I proved myself professionally, you might actually be proud to call me your wife. The irony was devastating. While Lauren had been working to make herself worthy of his love, he'd been interpreting her dedication as disinterest. While he'd been feeling unwanted, She'd been trying to become the woman she thought he needed. I ended it, Carter said urgently. The moment I got back from Vancouver, I told Victoria it was a mistake. I never saw her again outside of business functions. And I tried to be a better husband, Lauren. I tried to show you how much you meant to me. By asking for a divorce? Carter flinched. By then I thought the damage was done. I thought you could never love someone who'd betrayed you, even if you didn't know about it. I thought you deserved better than a husband who'd proven he wasn't worthy of you. Lauren was quiet for a long time, gently rocking Isla. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Did you love her? No. The answer came without hesitation. I never loved her. I was attracted to the way she made me feel about myself, but I never loved her. I loved you, Lauren. Even when I was being an idiot, even when I was making the worst mistake of my life, I loved you. But you slept with her anyway. Yes, and I've regretted it every day since. Lauren stood and placed Isla in her crib, her movements careful and controlled. When she turned back to Carter, her face was composed but distant. She wants you to sign the merger agreement. Yes. And if you don't, she'll make everything public. Our separation, the babies, your affair. It'll destroy your company's reputation. Probably. Lauren walked to the window, her arms wrapped around herself. What are you going to do? Carter stood and moved toward her, stopping just close enough that he could smell her lavender soap. I'm going to tell her no. Carter, your company is everything to you. You built it from nothing. If this scandal breaks, my company is not everything to me, he interrupted firmly. You are everything to me. You and Liam and Isla. Victoria can destroy my business, my reputation, my fortune. She can take everything I've built, but I won't let her destroy my family. Lauren turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. She'll ruin you, maybe, but I'd rather be ruined and honest than successful and living a lie. Carter reached out to cup her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. Lauren, I should have told you about Victoria years ago. I should have confessed my mistake and begged for your forgiveness then. Instead, I let the guilt eat away at our marriage until I convinced myself you'd be better off without me. I might not be able to forgive you for this, she whispered. I know, and I'll understand if you can't. But I'm done making decisions for you, done assuming I know what you want or need. If you want me to fight Victoria, I'll fight her. If you want me to sign the papers and save the company, I'll do that too. If you want me to leave and never come back, I'll do that. But whatever you decide, you'll decide it knowing the whole truth. Lauren looked into his eyes for a long moment, searching for something. What's the whole truth, Carter? The whole truth is that I've been in love with you since the day we met. The whole truth is that my affair with Victoria had nothing to do with not loving you and everything to do with not believing I deserved your love. The whole truth is that I would rather lose everything I own than lose one more day with you and our children. And if Victoria destroys everything, if we lose the house, the money, the security, then we'll build something new, something better, something honest. Carter pulled her closer, relief flooding through him when she didn't pull away. Lauren, I don't need the mansion or the company or any of it. I just need you. I need our family. Everything else is just stuff. Lauren was quiet for a moment, then she surprised him by reaching up to touch his face. Call Victoria. Tell her you have an answer. Carter's heart stopped. Lauren, tell her that Carter Langston doesn't negotiate with blackmailers. Tell her to do her worst. Lauren's voice grew stronger with each word. And then call James Morrison and have him arrest her for extortion and stalking. Carter stared at her in amazement. Are you sure? Once we take this step, there's no going back. She'll release everything. Let her. We'll weather whatever storm comes and we'll do it together. As a family. Lauren stepped closer to him, her hand over his heart. I'm tired of living in the shadows of secrets and fear. If we're going to make this marriage work, we start with complete honesty. All of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I love you, Carter whispered, pulling her into his arms. God, Lauren, I love you so much. I love you too, she whispered back. Even when you're an idiot. Even when you make terrible decisions. Even when you break my heart. I love you anyway. As Carter held his wife in their nursery, listening to their children's peaceful breathing, he realized that Victoria had unknowingly given them the greatest gift possible, the chance to build their marriage on complete truth, instead of careful omissions and protective silences. Whatever came next, they would face it together. 2 years later, the sound of toddler laughter echoed through the renovated farmhouse as Carter chased 18-month-old Liam around the kitchen island, while Lauren attempted to convince Isla that sweet potatoes were, in fact, edible. The chaos was beautiful, messy, and exactly what their Sunday mornings had become. Dada up, Liam demanded, his dark hair curly from his bath and his gray eyes, so much like Carter's, sparkling with mischief. He'd inherited his father's determination and his mother's stubborn streak, a combination that kept both parents on their toes. Isla, meanwhile, had developed her mother's thoughtful nature and her father's dramatic flair. She studied each bite of food with scientific precision before either accepting it gracefully or rejecting it with theatrical disgust that would have made Shakespeare proud. "Success," Lauren announced, as Isla finally took a bite of sweet potato. "I think she's going to be a food critic when she grows up." Carter scooped up Liam and settled into the chair beside his wife, marveling at how different their life looked now compared to 2 years ago. The Bellevue mansion had been sold 8 months ago, not because they'd lost everything to Victoria's scandal, but because they'd chosen to downsize. This farmhouse in Woodinville, with its wraparound porch and view of the Cascade Mountains, felt more like home than any marble palace ever could. Victoria's attempts at blackmail had backfired spectacularly. When Carter had refused her demands, and instead had her arrested for extortion, the resulting investigation had uncovered a pattern of corporate manipulation and fraud that had landed her in federal prison. The affair had become public knowledge, as she'd threatened, but the way Carter and Lauren had handled it together, with honesty and dignity, had actually strengthened public respect for them both. Langston Engineering had weathered the storm and emerged stronger. Carter had restructured the company, bringing in ethical oversight and focusing on sustainable technology projects. The financial hit had been significant initially, but their reputation for integrity had attracted new investors who valued transparency over profits at any cost. "What are you thinking about?" Lauren asked, following his gaze out the kitchen window to where Margaret was tending the vegetable garden she'd insisted they plant. "Just this," Carter said, gesturing around their chaotic kitchen. 2 years ago, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. Now I have more than I ever dreamed possible." Lauren leaned over to kiss his cheek, her lips lingering for a moment. "Even with sweet potato in your hair and coffee stains on your favorite shirt?" "Especially with sweet potato in my hair and coffee stains on my favorite shirt." Their relationship hadn't been magically perfect after Victoria's arrest. They'd gone to counseling, both individually and together, to learn how to communicate honestly instead of making assumptions about what the other person wanted or needed. There had been difficult conversations, moments of doubt, and nights when old insecurities crept back in. But they'd worked through each challenge together, building something stronger than their original marriage had ever been. They'd learned to fight fair, to ask for what they needed, and to trust that their love was strong enough to handle imperfection. "Mama, done," Isla announced, throwing her remaining sweet potato on the floor with evident satisfaction. "I think that's our cue for cleanup time," Lauren said with a laugh. As they cleaned up the breakfast chaos and prepared for their weekly trip to Pike Place Market, a tradition they'd started when the twins were 6 months old, Carter caught Lauren's hand and pulled her close. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For believing that love was worth fighting for, even when I didn't believe it myself. For giving me the chance to be the husband and father I always wanted to be. For building this beautiful, messy, perfect life with me." Lauren stood on her tiptoes to kiss him properly, her arms circling his neck. "Thank you for proving that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst mistakes. For showing me that real love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other every day even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard," Carter agreed. "Kiss, kiss," Liam demanded from his high chair, clapping his hands with delight. Isla giggled and clapped too, though Carter suspected she was more interested in the attention than the romantic gesture. "See," Lauren said with a grin. "Our children understand what's important," as Carter swept his wife into a dramatic dip that made both toddlers shriek with laughter. He realized that Victoria had been wrong about one thing. Their happiness hadn't been fragile at all. It had been tested, challenged, and nearly broken, but it had survived because it was built on something unshakable. The choice to love each other not despite their flaws, but because of the strength they found in facing those flaws together. Outside, Margaret was singing an old English folk song to the tomato plants, convinced that music helped them grow. The autumn leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the mountain view in shades of gold and crimson. And inside their warm kitchen, Carter Langston held his family close and knew that he was exactly where he belonged. Sometimes the greatest love stories weren't about finding the perfect person. They were about two imperfect people who refused to give up on each other, even when the whole world told them they should. In your own relationships, do you believe that love can truly survive betrayal and rebuild into something stronger? Or are some wounds too deep to heal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below, letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.